You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. Thanks for joining us. The headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remembers the raid on the Ugandan airport which claimed his brother's life as he kicks off an African tour. Protesters take to the streets of Nairobi in the wake of the death of a human rights lawyer. They say extrajudicial killings by Kenyan police are commonplace. We report from South Sudan where the peace process is back in doubt after another outbreak of violence. We start in Uganda, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has kicked off a rare tour of 4 African nations. This country launches a bid for states to side with it at the United Nations in exchange for security cooperation. Netanyahu using the occasion to remember the raid on Entebbe airport 40 years ago, in which his brother was killed. With details, here's France 24's Nicolas Jamin.
For Benjamin Netanyahu, this rare official trip to Africa was also an emotional one. It started with a ceremony at Entebbe Airport in Uganda, the exact place where his commando brother was killed rescuing hostages 40 years ago. A major aim of this trip is to boost economic ties. Netanyahu came here with an 80-strong delegation of Israeli business executives, and his government is launching a $13 million aid package for African countries.
Africa is a continent on the rise. Israel looks forward to strengthening ties with all its countries. Many African leaders visit Israel, and I'm proud to be the first Israeli Prime Minister in over 20 years, to come to visit sub-Saharan Africa.
Netanyahu attended a security summit with leaders from Rwanda, Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia and Zambia. Israel provides training for the security forces of some of these countries. After Uganda, the Israeli Prime Minister will travel to Kenya, Ethiopia and Rwanda. He's trying to gain potential allies, especially at the United Nations, where Israel is regularly condemned over its occupation of the West Bank and the blockade of the Gaza Strip. Many African countries cut ties with Israel after it went to war with its neighbors in 1967 and 1973. And relations were hindered by Israel's friendship with the apartheid regime in South Africa before its fall in 1994.
That's where prosecutors here in Paris have asked for life sentences for 2 former Rwandan mayors on trial in France over the 1994 genocide. Octavien Gezi and Tito Barahira are accused of organising the killing of hundreds of ethnic Tutsis in their village of Kabarondo. The pair denied charges of crimes against humanity, saying they were powerless to stop the spiral of violence which had engulfed the country and killed at least 800,000 people. Let's take a listen now to some of those campaigning for victims of the genocide.
I think that no penalty exists that is appropriate for the crime of genocide. But we can still be glad, I would say, that the prosecutor asked for a life sentence.
I felt the victims come back to life in this courtroom. They were brought back. It's the end of a process to recognize them, rehabilitate them, give them the dignity that was taken away by throwing them in mass graves.
To Kenyan nets, where protesters have taken to the streets in the wake of the killing of 3 people, including a human rights lawyer. 3 police officers being held over the deaths. Demonstrators in Nairobi denouncing what they say are frequent extrajudicial killings by authorities. We talk now to Ruud Elmendorp in Nairobi. Thanks very much for joining us, Ruud. Tell us a little bit more about today's protest. It seems to be pretty well attended.
Yes, thank you, Chris. We indeed had a peaceful demonstration here in Nairobi and other parts of Kenya, wherein the lawyers indeed protested against a series of seemingly extrajudicial killings. And it seems to be a part of a kind of culture in Kenya where people get killed by security forces and nobody's ever held accountable for that. And that was the main reason for the lawyers taking to the street. Not only this case, but several others that has been reported over the years.
And as you were saying, there are a number of mysterious incidents, even mysterious deaths in recent years.
Yes, and we can even go back further into history. In the early 1970s, in the early 90s, there were also several cabinet ministers and influential business people were killed, and also more recently, witnesses of the International Criminal Court were killed mysteriously, and also members that were witnessing against the terrorist Al-Shabaab group, who is also active in Kenya. So it seems to be a pattern, and that makes people here in Kenya very worried.
Thanks very much, Rudy Amundup. Angry scenes in Zimbabwe, where riot squads have fired tear gas at protesting public transport drivers in the capital, Harare. They've been striking over police roadblocks that they say have fueled corruption. The demonstrations have turned into a rare show of dissent against President Robert Mugabe's 36-year rule. This as the economy weakens, with banks running out of cash and widespread food shortages caused by a harsh drought. Elsewhere, the Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has approved a new board of directors for the country's state oil company. The move sees Oil Minister Emmanuel Ibi Kachikwu lose his post as General Managing Director to Dr. Maikanti Kakala-Baru. But the former stays on as chairman. Buhari came to power last year on the back of a promise to clean up the corruption, which has helped cause the deepest crisis in more than a decade in Africa's biggest economy. Now to South Sudan and renewed violence, which has thrown the recent peace deal into doubt. Dozens of people died last week in clashes in the town of Wau. The bloodshed has thrown the spotlight onto the capacity of the transitional government, led by President Salva Kiir and former rebel leader Riek Machar, to turn the page on years of violence. This from my correspondent Simona Foltin.
Another grave is dug at this improvised cemetery near the Catholic Cathedral in Wau. 13 people have been buried here alone, but many more are believed to have died in last week's violence. The youngest victim was only 2.5 years old. The boy's mother says her son was killed when soldiers of the SPLA, the National Army, looted her house.
The soldiers told me to open the door to the house. Before I could do that, they fired at the lock and opened it. The bullet hit my child and our neighbor's wife. My son was covered in blood. I started washing my child's body and he was crying for half an hour before he took his last breath.
People here accuse civilians and soldiers from the Dinka ethnic group of systematically targeting members of the Fartit tribes. Over 30,000 Fartit are now seeking shelter in churches and near the United Nations base. They no longer trust the South Sudan army to protect them. The violence is perceived as being part of a government-backed campaign to increase Dinka control over land, resources and political power.
Most of the people who live there, they are non-Dinkas. And so those people came and attacked them, looting their properties, and anybody who resists is killed. And that's why people are even wondering if the soldiers of SPLA were protecting people, why not to prevent these people or send them back?
Even though the Fartit are the majority tribe in the area, most soldiers based here are Dinka. Their commander denies his troops killed any civilians. He instead blames opposition forces loyal to recently reinstated Vice President Riek Machar.
What sparked the violence was multiple factors. One factor is a rebel intrusion and attack.
This part of Wau, home to members of the Fartit ethnic group, has been left completely deserted after last week's violence forced people from their homes. Although the details of this latest attack are yet to be established, one thing is certain. The peace deal signed almost a year ago is not holding up. Simona Foltin for France 24 in Wau, South Sudan.
That's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thanks ever so much for watching. Don't forget you can get more Africa news and more world news on our website, www.francevancat.com. Mark Owen will be with you very shortly with the world news headlines.